All right, back after the holiday weekend. Back for the Morning Pit. Appreciate everybody kind of giving us a little break yesterday. Wanted to have one day off here for the Morning Pit on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Obviously, yesterday was the first day of the week. Back at it after the the Christmas holiday weekend. But, we do tape these things for the most part the day before. And so I wanted to kind of avoid... I wanted to try and work as little as possible on Christmas Day. Those plans ultimately didn't entirely come together. We'll talk about that in a second. You probably know what I'm referring to. But wanted to work as little as possible on Christmas Day. Wanted to make it a holiday time with family and that kind of thing. So didn't do a Morning Pit video for yesterday. We appreciate everyone being understanding on that. But we're back at it now here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So make sure while you're here, you like this video and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Subscribe button is right down there. It's a blue rectangle. It says subscribe. You click that. Then you can also have the option to turn on notifications so you get an alert every time we post a new video at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, every time we go live at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. You don't want to miss any of those things, so make sure you subscribe right here, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. And of course, the website, it's been busy all weekend. Even though we were trying to work as little as possible, it was still busy there at Panther-Lair.com, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com, the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet, football, basketball, and recruiting. You find it all, Panther-Lair.com, Panther-Lair.com, and the message boards are the place to be. If you are a Pitt fan, you want to talk to other Pitt fans, you want to stay up to date on everything going on in the world of Pitt sports, you go to the message boards at Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. And it was the holiday weekend. It was Christmas Eve on Saturday, Christmas Day on Sunday. And Pitt fans still had plenty of to talk about. The message boards were still very active. I think it's the best community the best online community of Pitt sports fans that you're going to find right there at Panther-Lair.com. And of course, I keep talking about how there was, there was all this activity and there was still some work to do on Christmas Day. Well, Pitt got a commitment from the 2024 class. Those are kids who are in their junior years of high school right now. And so they have, another 18 months or so until they sign their, a year. They have a year until they sign their letter of intent because they'll be a senior next year. They'll sign with their colleges in December of 2023. They're in the recruiting class of 2024, and Pitt got a new commitment for that class in the person of DayDay Farmer, 4-star wide receiver at Cocoa High School in Florida. DayDay Farmer ranks number 156 overall in the class of 2024 nationally. So he's a top 160 prospect, top 156 prospect. He's the number 23 wide receiver prospect in the class of 2024 nationally. Chose Pitt over offers from Arizona State, Boston College, Georgia Tech, Iowa State, Miami, Florida, Michigan State, Minnesota, Missouri, Nebraska, Penn State, Purdue, Virginia, West Virginia. Good Power 5 list, some really solid schools on that group, and he commits to Pitt early. Farmer is a little bit on the smaller side. We list him about 6', 165. We'll see if we can get an updated height weight on him. But he was productive last year for a Cocoa High School team that won a state championship. He had 63 catches for 938 yards and 10 receiving touchdowns. He also had a rushing touchdown and a kick return touchdown. So he scored 12 touchdowns and had 900 receiving yards, caught 60-some passes for a state championship team. He also had a touchdown reception, in the state championship game. So that's a pretty productive, way to go out for him, way to finish the season. He's a big-time wide receiver prospect in that 2024 recruiting class, and we saw Pitt load up on wide receivers in the 23 class with 4 of them total, and we're going to talk about that in a second. But if you have an opportunity to get one of these top-end guys, even in the next class, you go and do it. And he's the second commitment for Pitt in this 2024 recruiting class. Jasir Whittington, defensive tackle from Imhotep High School in Philadelphia, another 4-star guy. He committed, when did Jasir commit? He committed like last April, I think it was, that he committed to Pitt. And so 2 guys committed so far in this 2024 recruiting class, 2 guys who are juniors in high school. They're committed to Pitt, and they're both 4-star prospect. One a wide receiver, one a defensive tackle. And I think If you look at Pitt recruiting in the past couple of years, certainly you're not surprised to see a top-ranked defensive prospect choose Pitt, but maybe a little more surprised to see that guy on the offensive side jump in. But DayDay Farmer talked about Taekwon Underwood being a big part of his recruitment and a big part of the draw. I mean, we've seen Underwood have a positive impact on Pitt recruiting since he arrived last January. Of course, there was the extended and continued pursuit of Hakeem Williams, 5-star wide receiver out of Florida who visited Pitt twice unofficially. So he came up on his own dime twice. Came up once for an official visit in June. Ultimately signed with Florida State, but still, getting that far with a player of his caliber is pretty telling. Ryan Wingo, another 5-star wide receiver, this one in the class of 2024, came out on an unofficial visit last year. So you really had the, arguably and I think, or maybe Wingo was in the 25 class. They just had this run of 3 guys from the classes of 2023, 24, and 25 who all were, seemed to be the number one wide receivers in their class, potential 5-star prospects. And it was all due to Taekwon Underwood's relationships and recruitment of those guys. And so getting DayDay Farmer to commit this early, another, sort of notch in the belt for Taekwon Underwood. As many people have been quick to point out, they now have to hold on to DayDay Farmer for approximately the next 50 weeks until signing day, or 51 weeks until signing day. And that's always going to be part of it. And to be quite honest, I mean, it doesn't even matter that it's happening here at the end of December. When they get their regular June rush of commitments, and I think we did this to some extent this past year, we're probably going to look at that list and say, well, a few of these guys ultimately aren't going to sign. And that was the case this year when Pitt got a bunch of commitments in June, and a handful of those guys, Shelton Lewis, Bryce Pollock, Dadrian Zipper, I think was a little bit later, but Colin Van Roy, Philip Daniels, a number of these guys committed, but ultimately didn't sign. And that's going to be the case every year. You're going to have decommitments. I think that's part of the landscape nowadays. But I don't think every time somebody commits, I don't think we need to just sort of have this automatic reflexive, this reaction of, oh, geez, we'll see if he sticks. Some will, some won't. And that's part of it, but I think you can still sort of allow yourself to enjoy the fact that we got a commitment from a 4-star guy, a guy who ranks pretty highly nationally in the class and looks like a really good prospect, and someone could come in and help you win games in the ACC. I mean, that's a good thing. Whether he signs or not, I mean, obviously that'll be the final test, is getting him to sign and then keeping him around for a couple of years. I mean, who knows what's going to happen, but your chances of getting him to sign in December are better if you get a commitment from him than if you didn't get a commitment from him, right? I mean, it's better to get the commitment than to not. So that was a nice Christmas Day surprise for Pitt. I mean, kind of had some idea that it was coming. It wasn't a total surprise, but still a pretty nice ad for Pitt. Good start to the 2024 recruiting class. We'll see where they go from here. Certainly, I think the next big activity, I mean, we'll see coaches visiting schools in January, and I don't think they can go too far into February. So just for a few weeks in January, these coaches will be out visiting schools. We'll see if they bring guys in. Quite frankly, if Pitt basketball keeps sort of going like it has been, if they rattle off some wins here, starting with the North Carolina game at the end of this week on Friday, and then into January, if they can rattle off some ACC wins, there might be some good weekends in February to possibly have a junior day at a basketball game again, which we haven't seen in a long, long time. So maybe that'll be on the horizon as well. And then you'll get into spring camp, and that's when the recruits will start visiting campus, and we'll start seeing which guys they can get, like I say, in town for visits. And that'll start really kind of piecing together what that 2024 recruiting class will look like. Still kind of wrapping up last week with signing day in the 2023 recruiting class. And I was thinking about how the recruiting class, the guys that they signed, how they sort of fit in with what the roster needs. And we did a scholarship board breakdown yesterday on Panther-Lair.com. We have that on the message boards at Panther-Lair.com. It's posted there. It'll be pinned to the top of the board. But just kind of breaking down class by class all the scholarship players on the roster. as it's currently projected. I think there's still some upperclassmen, some seniors that we don't know if they're going to come back or go. Vincent Davis hasn't announced anything. Jared Wayne hasn't announced anything. I think there are questions about those guys. Jake Cradle and Blake Zabovic could both be super seniors next year. We haven't heard anything from those guys about what they plan to do. Same thing with Devin Danielson and David Green and Tyler Bentley. I sort of assume those guys are coming back, but we'll see. Shane Simon is the same thing. Marquez Williams and AJ Woods. So, I think there's still some movement to be made. But ultimately, we kind of took an early stab at what the scholarship board could look like. And we currently project them to have, 1 or 0 available scholarships at this point. I think they're going to have a few more and bring in more transfers. But how did they do with the recruiting class? Did they get what they needed from the 2023 recruiting class that they signed in December? And kind of looking down the positions, we know they wanted a freshman quarterback, a high school quarterback prospect to come in. And so they got that. But, I think one of the biggest position group they signed 4 wide receivers. That's more than any other position. And when you look at it, you say, wow, that seems like a lot. And it is, but they needed that influx. And they probably could stand to bring in a transfer receiver or two. Someone from another school. You're looking at right now if everybody comes back. Gavin Thompson being the question mark. I didn't put him on the scholarship board. We'll see what he ends up deciding to do. Former walk-on who went on scholarship. I assume he'll be back. But you're looking at about 10 guys on scholarship, and 4 of them will be freshmen. Bub Means and Jared Wayne and Kanate Mumfield, that was your big 3 from last season, assuming all of those guys come back. And it seems like, Means and Mumfield will. Wayne hasn't said one way or the other. But then after that, you've really got 3 returning players who didn't do a whole lot last year. Miles Alston saw the field a little bit. Addison Copeland and Che Wabuko didn't during their freshman seasons. And that's the depth you were returning. You needed to add numbers to this group just to field a healthy roster, And as it says, you're going to need, some of these freshmen just to sort of fill out at the very least your 3 deep, and if not, if not 1 or 2 spots on your 2 deep, depending on what some guys decide to do. And I think it's a talented group coming in. Zion Fowler and Kenny Johnson and Israel Polk and Lamar Seymour. And that's alphabetical order, not necessarily the order I favor them in. But I think there's some talented players in there who might be able to play their way ahead of maybe some of those younger guys. We talk about Addison Copeland and Che Wabuko and Miles Alston. They, some of the freshmen might be able to pass some of those guys on the depth chart and put themselves into a 2 deep spot. Now, you're also going to be looking at maybe transfers come in, and you'll have to account for that. But they needed an influx just of numbers. Talent, certainly, but of numbers just to fill out the wide receiver room. And I think it was true at running back, too. They signed 2 guys, TJ Harvison and Montrevious Lloyd. If we don't know what Vincent Davis is going to do. All right, I'm assuming he leaves. If he leaves, they've got 2 tailbacks. They've got Rodney Hammond and Sebo Flemister. Daniel Carter's a fullback. They needed Harvison and Lloyd, and quite frankly, maybe even a transfer just to come in and, again, fill out the room. They ran into some depth problems, some number issues at running back and wide receiver over the years. And I think, wide receiver you look at and say, well, from the 2021 roster to right now, there were 3 guys they lost to transfer. And Jordan Addison, Jordan Addison, Jaden Bradley, and Jalen Barton. All these guys who start with the name Jay. But they're all gone. And they all presumably could have been on the 2023 roster. Well, they're not. And that leaves you missing... that leaves you with some holes on your roster. They've already filled in with 2 transfers just to get up to the spot that they're in right now in Bub Means and Kanate Mumfield. And so they needed those numbers. Running back, sort of the same thing. They have, Izzy Abanikanda from the 2020 class leaves early. Jordan Bailey from the 2021 class and never gets here. So that's 2 classes that are not going to have anyone. Or no, excuse me. Izzy was in the 2020 class. Rodney Hammond was in the 21 class. And then Jordan Bailey was supposed to be the recruit in the 22 class. And right now you're only going to have 1 guy out of those 3 classes on the roster in 2023 in Rodney Hammond. So you're going to need just to fill in some of those empty spots, some of those places. And even if you go back to Abanikanda's class, they had Izzy and Henry Parrish committed at one point. They tried to reload at running back that year. Makes you kind of wonder why they didn't try and take two backs in the 2022 class or 2021. But instead they go with, I guess they did in 2021 too, because they had Rodney Hammond and Malik Newton. So you have back-to-back classes, 2020 and 2021, where they try to take two running backs, only end up with one in each of them. And then their 2022 guy, where they only take, or that 2022 class where they only take one guy, they end up with none. So you're looking at over three classes, they're only going to have one player from those three classes on the 2023 roster. So yeah, they needed multiple running backs in the recruiting class. It's a surprise that they waited as long as they did to get TJ Harbison, and it's a little bit of a surprise that they haven't brought in a transfer running back just to fill out the numbers. I think the offensive line is probably an area where they needed more than three guys. They signed three, Ryan Coretta and Ty Ray and BJ Williams, but looking at the returning roster, they're currently projected to return 11 scholarship offensive linemen. Well, that's pretty cool, but 5 of them are seniors this year. Three of those five will be able to come back in 2024 if they're so inclined as super seniors, but you potentially could lose all 5 of them, or 4 plus a transfer out of the lower classes, or 3 plus 2 you could be looking at less than 10 scholarship offensive linemen returning for the 2024 roster. And that's including the guys who are freshmen, are going to be freshmen this year. And so you probably needed more numbers. And there's, similar sort of gaps in the recruiting there, where the guys haven't panned out, or they've lost guys from the offensive line room. But you probably, they needed to reload. And, I think they're going to be heavy on the offensive line transfer market next year, I would think, because they're going to need it depending on how many of those seniors they don't return. Defensive line, they signed 3 linemen total, 2 ends and a tackle, Antonio Cayman, Maverick Gracio, and Isaiah Neal. It's not a bad number, signing 3 linemen in a class. I think, personally, I would probably shoot for 4, 2 ends and 2 tackles every year, unless you have a year where you got 3 of one, and then you might pare it down the next year just to keep it balanced. But they've signed 3 defensive linemen in each of the last 3 classes. Actually, they signed 4 in the 2020 class with Nikai Johnson and 2021 class. I'm getting my numbers mixed up. In the 2021 class, they had Nikai Johnson, Elliott Donald, Dorian Ford, and they signed Naquan Brown as well. He's gone. But you're looking at having 3 from each of the last 3 classes on the roster in 2023. Probably, and you're looking at having 7 guys in the senior class this year. Some of which could come back in 24, some of which will be done and out of eligibility after this season. Probably could have pushed the numbers a little bit more and taken maybe another tackle in this class, or another tackle and another end in this recruiting class, you're going to need to rebuild some of those younger ranks on the defensive line. And maybe the 2024 class will be a bigger one where they do get at least 4 guys total, if not 5. Of course, they signed 3 linebackers this year with Jordan Bass, Rasheem Biles, and Braylon Lovelace. I think that was a good number. I think that's what they needed. They've got 3 seniors for 2023, Brandon George, Bengali Kamara, Shane Simon. George and Kamara could come back in 2024, so you've got potential there. At least you're not going to be totally sapped, but you've got 3 seniors on this upcoming season's roster and 3 juniors on this upcoming season's roster. And after that, you don't have anyone down until Kyle Lewis, who's a redshirt freshman. And so, you've got veteran depth for the upcoming 2023 season, but you have some holes in the room after that. And so I think, I think that's why this linebacker class is so important and looks so good with Bass and Biles and Lovelace. You have some guys in there who should be able to contribute early and very likely will be called upon to do so. I think they're going to be, I think Bass is really good. I think Biles can be really good. I think Lovelace might take a little bit of time, but I think he eventually can get into the mix and be a pretty good linebacker for Pitt. But I think they're going to need those guys because there's some big gaps there, and I think they're going to run out of upperclassmen real fast here in the next year or two. And so they needed a big linebacker class, and they probably needed, they have to get at least 2 next year and probably 3 just to keep rebuilding that group. Defensive back, I kind of like what they did. Shadarian Harrison, Jesse Anderson, Cruz Brookins. I think they're three good players. I think Harrison and Anderson are really good. That filled in some of what they needed. They got Donovan McMillan as a safety or as a transfer at safety, which I think helps the case as well. I think they got what they needed to sort of keep a steady growth. And, you'll always have guys in that defensive back room who, corners who could play safety or, mix and match or what have you. But I think they kept the numbers up, and they've got good talent in those groups as well. And so, I feel you feel pretty good about the defensive back room, with the number of players they brought in and the caliber of players that they brought in. I think they did what they needed to do there. So, overall, I think they addressed some big needs at running back and receiver. Obviously, no tight ends yet, but that's still a work in progress. We were just reading yesterday about a kid who decommitted, I think, from South Florida, and is back on the market. And so Pitt's, working there. I think they needed more offensive linemen. I think they needed more defensive linemen. And I think next year's class, the 2024 class, is going to have to reflect that. They're going to need to bring in some extra guys and at least one transfer probably on the offensive line, depending on how many seniors leave. But I think they got what they needed at linebacker and in the secondary. So, running back, receiver, linebacker, secondary, I think those were well-addressed positions the Pitt coaches identified and went after and really had big numbers in those groups pretty much throughout the recruiting process. Harbison would be the one exception. They added him late. And I guess Israel Polk as well at wide receiver. So, they went from, really after Zion Fowler decommitted, they were down to two wide receivers with with Lamar Seymour and Kenny Johnson. And then by the time he got the signing day, so at one point they had two receivers and one running back committed. By the time he got the signing day, they had four receivers and two running backs. And so I think they ended up where they needed to be in terms of quantity at those two positions. But we'll see how it sort of develops over the, obviously in January, see if there are any late targets they decide to add. I think they could go after another defensive lineman. I wouldn't be surprised to see them add a D tackle late in the process. We'll see what else they try to target. I mean, I think, linemen, tight ends, those would be some of the priority positions if they're going to add a couple more guys to the recruiting class before February signing day. And then, of course, there's always going to be a big focus on the transfers. They'll certainly look to bring in some guys to help there. I think running back is a spot where they're going to need to bring guys in, and we'll see what else they go after. So that's my thoughts on that recruiting class, maybe kind of wrapping up the early signing day there. One final day of thoughts, so I'm sure I'll keep writing about it and talking about it down the stretch. But thanks for tuning in today. Hope you had a great holiday weekend. Hope you had a good time with family. Hope you stayed warm because it was really friggin' cold out there. And so hopefully you managed to keep your socks on and sweatshirts on inside and stay nice and warm. We'll have a lot of coverage this week and content getting you ready for the Sun Bowl on Friday, plus Pitt, Carolina on Friday. It's going to be a big Pitt sports day on Saturday or on Friday, so we're going to have a lot to talk about on the Morning Pitt. So make sure you stay tuned in every day right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. So thanks again for tuning in and checking it out. Hope you have a great Tuesday. And we're going to motor through this week. It's going to go fast. And before you know it, we're going to have a lot of Pitt sports to watch and talk about. And we'll certainly be doing it on Panther-Lair.com. So thanks again. Make sure you like this video and subscribe before you leave. And we'll talk to you tomorrow morning for the Morning Pitt on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.